Here is something that almost nobody is saying right now. The Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding. The agreement signed by the United States and Iran on June 17, 2026 at Versailles has already failed. Not because Iran is lying, not because Trump changed his mind, not because Israel will intervene, though all of those things may happen. It has structurally failed because of a design problem that has existed in every single American nuclear deal for the last 32 years. A problem with a name, a problem with a pattern, a problem that nobody seems to have learned from. I call it the compliance first paradox. And by the end of this video, you will understand exactly why this deal is almost certain to collapse at the same moment every other deal collapsed, and what that means for the next 60 days. AU Tority Frame. I want to be transparent with you about who I am. I am not a government official. I am not a former intelligence analyst. I am a researcher who reads primary documents, so you do not have to. What I'm going to show you today is not opinion. It is the documented record of 3 separate American nuclear agreements: the 1994 Agreed Framework with North Korea, the 2015 JCPOA with Iran, and the 2026 Islamabad MOU, and the one structural flaw they all share. If this pattern holds, and history says it will, the 60-day negotiating window will not produce a final deal. Instead, it will produce another round of mutual accusation, followed by an extended pause, followed by a crisis. Let me show you exactly why, and let me start somewhere that might surprise you. Every major American nuclear deal rests on a fundamental assumption that the target country will move first. America says, you disarm, then we reward you. The other side says, you reward us, then we disarm. Neither side trusts the other enough to go first. And so every deal becomes a negotiation, not about nuclear weapons, but about sequencing, about who blinks first. This is the compliance first paradox. The moment you demand compliance before incentives, you guarantee the deal will stall, because the other side has every rational reason to do exactly the same thing to you. And here's the critical insight that most analysts miss. The paradox does not just slow these deals down. It actively makes them structurally weaker. Because while the two sides argue about who goes first, the other side uses the delay to strengthen its position. This has happened 3 times now. Let me walk you through each one. KZN, North Korea, 19 Korea, 1994, the deal that gave us. The playbook, October 21st, 1994. The Clinton administration signs the agreed framework with North Korea. The deal looks simple. North Korea freezes its nuclear program at Yongbyon. In exchange, the United States provides 2 light water nuclear reactors and 500,000 tons of heavy fuel oil per year. On paper, it is a success. For nearly 8 years, North Korea's plutonium production stops. IAEA inspectors report compliance. American officials testify to Congress that there are no fundamental violations. But look at what was happening underneath the surface. The United States wanted North Korea to comply first, specifically to allow IAEA inspectors access to 2 undeclared sites before the reactors were provided. North Korea refused. Pyongyang's position, we disarm when we see the benefits. Washington's position, you comply, then we reward you. Sound familiar? The agreed framework collapsed this deadlock through a workaround. The 2 sides agreed to defer the most sensitive inspections until the second reactor was nearly complete. In other words, they kicked the hardest problem down the road. They created a time-delayed compliance first paradox. And then, while no one was watching the compliance question, North Korea was enriching uranium through a completely separate secret program. By 2002, American intelligence had the evidence. By 2003, the deal was dead. Here is the game theory lesson from North Korea. When you defer the compliance question to keep a deal alive, you do not solve the problem. You just give the other side more time and more resources to prepare for the next confrontation. Case TWO, Iran, 2015, the deal that almost solved it. And then didn't July 14th, 2015. The JCPOA is signed in Vienna. This deal actually contained a sophisticated answer to the compliance first paradox. The structure was elegant. Iran would implement its nuclear constraints first, the IAEA would verify them, and only then, on what the negotiators called Implementation Day, would sanctions be lifted. On January 16th, 2016, Implementation Day arrived. The IAEA certified Iran's compliance, and the United States, European Union, and United Nations lifted their nuclear-related sanctions. Roughly $29 billion in frozen assets were released. Iran's oil exports surged back toward 2 million barrels per day. For 2 years, this worked. Iran complied. Inspectors verified. The compliance-first structure held. And then, in May 2018, President Trump withdrew the United States from the deal. Not because Iran had violated it, but because he considered it insufficient. The IAEA had consistently certified Iranian compliance, but the United States left anyway. Think about what happened next from Iran's perspective. Tehran followed the compliance-first structure exactly as designed. It moved first. It accepted intrusive inspections. It received economic benefits. And then the other side unilaterally canceled the agreement, leaving Iran with no nuclear concessions, no economic benefits, and 8 years of documented restraint that now meant nothing. What would you conclude from that experience? Iran's conclusion was straightforward. Complying first is not a strategy. It is a vulnerability. And so, when negotiations resumed in 2025 and 2026, Iran arrived at the table with a fundamentally different posture, one built entirely on never going first again. Case 3, The Islamabad MOU 2026, the paradox returns. With a twist June 17, 2026. The Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding is signed at Versailles. The document is 14 points long. And when you read it carefully, not the media summaries, but the actual text, something becomes immediately visible. 12 of the 14 points deal with economics. The Strait of Hormuz, sanctions relief, oil exports, a $300 billion reconstruction fund, frozen assets. Only 2 points mention the nuclear program at all. Now, here's where it gets structurally interesting. The MOU contains a built-in sequencing contradiction, and legal analysts spotted it immediately. Paragraph 11 states that Iran's frozen assets cannot be released until the MOU is implemented. But paragraph 13 states that nuclear negotiations will not even begin until the implementation referred to in paragraph 11 has commenced. In other words, assets first, then nuclear talks, which means Iran receives economic relief before the hard questions are answered, which is precisely the sequencing Iran demanded and America historically refused. But wait, because then American officials went on background to clarify that the MOU actually ties economic benefits to nuclear compliance. That sanctions relief is conditional on Iranian nuclear concessions. So which is it? Analysts from 2 law firms describe the MOU as functioning as a sequencing mechanism as much as a ceasefire framework. And one expert from the Basic think tank told Newsweek that Iran had been quite skillful in separating the nuclear question from the 60-day window. This gives them leverage and time, he said. This is the compliance first paradox in its most advanced form. Not just a deadlock, but a document that both sides can read as requiring the other side to go first. Iran's reading: we get sanctions relief, then we discuss nuclear compliance. America's reading: nuclear compliance comes before full sanctions relief. Both readings are plausible from the same text. And that is not an accident. That is what happens when you write an agreement specifically designed to survive domestic politics on both sides. You build in ambiguity. And ambiguity is the compliance-first paradox's best friend. The prisoner's dilemma, negotiating table. What I have just described is not just a political problem. It is a classic structure from game theory called the prisoner's dilemma. 2 players. Each must choose to cooperate or defect. If both cooperate, both benefit. If one cooperates and the other defects, the cooperator gets the worst possible outcome. If both defect, both lose. But neither loses catastrophically. In this structure, the rational strategy is never to cooperate first. Because if you go first and the other side defects, you have just handed them everything for nothing. Iran learned this lesson in 2015 and 2018. They cooperated. They went first. America defected. Not militarily, but diplomatically. And Iran was left holding an empty agreement. What Iran has done in the 2026 MOU is not obstruction. It is rational strategy. By separating the nuclear question from the 60-day window, by ensuring oil exports begin at signing, by loading sanctions relief into the front end of the deal, Iran has structured the agreement so that it gains tangible benefits before any irreversible nuclear concessions are required. The Carnegie Endowment for International Peace described this clearly in May 2026. Iran has pushed the enrichment issue down the agenda, recognizing that the gap between the 2 sides may be too wide for a solution. Tehran appears increasingly uninterested in even engaging on enrichment. And here is the uncomfortable implication for the 60-day window. Iran does not need a final deal to benefit from this situation. Every day that passes without a final agreement is a day that oil exports continue, that sanctions are waived, and that Iran's economic position strengthens. Time is now working for Iran, not against it. The paradox has been resolved, but only for one side. I want to be intellectually honest here, because there is a real counter-argument. The counter-argument is this: Libya worked. In December 2003, Muammar Gaddafi announced the complete dismantlement of Libya's weapons of mass destruction program. American and British inspectors walked into Libyan nuclear facilities. Equipment was removed. The program was eliminated. Gaddafi complied first, and he was rewarded with normalized relations and the lifting of sanctions. If Libya could accept compliance first, why can't Iran? The answer is in what happened next. In 2011, the United States and its NATO allies supported the military campaign that overthrew and killed Gaddafi. From the perspective of any adversarial state watching, the lesson was unmistakable. You disarm, you comply, you go first. And when the political winds change, you are removed from power anyway. Iran's leadership watched this. North Korea watched this. And both drew the same strategic conclusion. Nuclear leverage is the only guarantee that the deal will be honored. Libya proves that compliance first can work in the short term. But it also proves that the political durability of the agreement depends on something the deal itself cannot guarantee. the continued willingness of the more powerful party to honor it. That is the ultimate source of the compliance first paradox. It is not a technical problem. It is a trust problem. And trust cannot be written into a memorandum. I want to give you 3 specific, testable predictions for the next 60 days. Not vague scenarios. Concrete claims that either happen or they do not. Prediction 1. The 60-day window will not produce a final agreement on uranium enrichment. Instead, both sides will announce either an extension of the negotiating period or a framework for further talks. Watch for language about progress and continued dialogue. That is the diplomatic vocabulary for a deal that is not done. Prediction 2. Iran will export oil at maximum possible levels during the 60-day window. Not because of bad faith, because the MOU explicitly allows it. And because Iran's rational strategy is to rebuild its financial position before nuclear concessions are required. Watch Iran's crude export figures for July and August 2026. If they exceed 1.5 million barrels per day, my analysis is confirmed. Prediction 3. The strongest disagreement will not be between the US and Iran. It will be between the US and Israel, and between different factions within the US government. The nuclear question was deferred specifically because the two sides could not agree on enrichment terms. When technical negotiations begin, that disagreement will reemerge, and Israel's response to those negotiations will be the variable that most destabilizes the 60-day window. These predictions are falsifiable. I will come back to them in 60 days. Subscribe so you are here when I do. There is a deeper question underneath all of this. The compliance first paradox is not really about nuclear weapons. It is about what happens when two countries that do not trust each other try to construct an agreement that requires trust to function. Every solution proposed so far involves the same structure. One side moves first, the other side follows, and the deal holds because both sides calculate that cooperation is more valuable than defection. But that calculation depends on a shared belief that the deal will be honored. Not just today, but through changes in government, changes in political pressure, changes in what each side considers acceptable. The United States and Iran have now destroyed 2 major agreements in less than a decade. The JCPOA collapsed not because of technical failure, but because of political will. The current MOU may follow the same path. So here is the question I want to leave you with, and I genuinely do not know the answer. Is there a structural form of nuclear agreement that does not require compliance first? A deal architecture that solves the trust problem rather than deferring it? Historically, arms control treaties between the US and Soviet Union used simultaneous verification. Both sides moved at the same time, under mutual inspection, with automatic sanctions triggers built into the agreement itself. Could that model work here? And if not, what does it mean for a world where nuclear negotiations have failed the same way, 3 times in a row, over 32 years? Think about that, and come back in 60 days.